Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Wow, it's been seems like it's been forever since I've gotten another video out. First of all, sincere apologies, but unfortunately had some pretty serious health issues and still dealing with those. So had to take a little bit of time off there to kind of get into that stuff. But just really happy to be back with everybody again. It's great to see all the comments coming in though on the past videos. So just really thank everybody for those. It's great again to interact with all of you. It's fantastic. So a very warm welcome back to everybody. And certainly warm welcome to all the new subscribers or new viewers, I should say. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe. It's fantastic for the channel, and we can still try to keep moving forward and doing some different things. But again, just wanted to get back with you guys, and of course, I couldn't think of something better than, again, a Smith & Wesson revolver. And this one is really pretty interesting and cool, as a lot of the Smith & Wessons are, as we always seem to talk about on this show or on the channel. But this one is a pretty unique in the sense it was only made for 12 years. I believe it was from about 1980 to about 1992, kind of in that time frame. And if I remember right, just from memory, maybe somewhere around 50,000 pieces or something like that were made in total. But this is actually a model 681, and so you would be you wouldn't be mistaken if you thought or made a mistake and thought it was a 686, because it's basically a brother sister product or revolver to the 686. This is actually, and again, Smith & Wesson, we love how they do the names minus the model numbers, but they called this one the Distinguished 357 Service Magnum Revolver. So Distinguished 357 Service Magnum Revolver for the 681. And we'll get into this. We'll talk about the L frame. We'll talk about, pretty much what you're not seeing there, which is the adjustable sights, and maybe kind of where it fell within law enforcement and who were using these handguns at that time. And maybe, again, how it relates a little bit to its brother sister platform, the 686. But just a beautiful firearm, definitely going back to the just exquisite engineering and build quality of what Smith & Wesson was doing with revolvers back in that time. So yeah, let's get into the deep dive, and we'll go through this Smith & Wesson 681.
Right, so we're into our deep dive on this Smith & Wesson 681. And like I said in the intro, just an exquisite firearm. And really, I've talked about it on the channel before, when Smith & Wesson was really, at their peak of building revolvers. And, that really, for me, stretches from probably from the 60s, through right up until about 1990 or so, maybe pushes into the 1990s. But for me, that's just when they were at their pinnacle and sweet spot. And so this 681 falls right into that realm, like we talked about in the intro. This was a firearm that was introduced in 1980, ran through about 12 years through 1992, and is an L frame, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. A couple disclaimers. I think I kind of forgot about this in the last from some of the last videos, but no, that we won't actually fire the firearm. The Daily Defender doesn't have a range to do that, and yes, you'll hear me say and quite a bit, because that's the way I talk. But back to the 681, and it's what I just think is also a very cool name, like I shared in the intro, the Distinguished 357 Service Magnum Revolver. It just sounds so official and formal that it just seems to fit the firearm as well. Offside comment, this one didn't come with a box at all. It just came with the firearm, but it actually came with the original instruction manual, the pamphlet that Smith & Wesson always issued with their firearms, or at least I think around 57 or so is when they started issuing manuals and pamphlets. So we have that, but we don't have a box. Finding a box for this, I think, is going to be a bit of a challenge, but that's okay. But back to the firearm itself, the 681. So this is a 357 Magnum platform. Obviously can also shoot 38, as we know from past discussions of these revolvers. And this was in that 686 family, like I said, just taking one step back, maybe talk a little bit about the L frame and where that came from. And again, not without trying to write a history book and getting every detail specific and right. But effectively, Smith & Wesson had come out with the K-frame and had the K-frame for a long time in 357 Magnum. In fact, just like this one here, this is a Model 19, and it's a clear and safe firearm, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But Smith & Wesson, when they had introduced the K-frame and people were using the K-frame 357 Magnum /38, generally the round that was used was 158 grain 357 Magnum. And even though it was a 357 Magnum round, it was generally, controllable, and it wasn't a really hot round per se. But a couple things happened, and I think it was in the 70s, again, not trying to get an exact history book timeline here. But with the K-frame, the design change, and I'm not sure that'll come up on camera at all, but this point here, basically on the barrel there, maybe you can kind of see it there. It's flattened off. And they had to do that with the K-frame. And it created essentially a weak point. Now, there were some of the design features that changed as well. Again, I don't remember every single detail, but effectively those design changes in the K-frame and the fact that people I think it was the mid-70s or late 70s, started to shoot hotter 357 Magnum rounds, 125 grain, 110 grain. Of course, the 38 plus Ps became very popular, although they didn't have the quote-unquote hot load of the 110s and 125s. Anyways, long story short, people started to see forcing cone failures at this point. I've never seen one. I don't know anybody that's has had that happen. But Smith & Wesson certainly had evidence of that. They certainly had pistols returned of that. There was, talk that really the K-frame 357 Magnums were really kind of designed just for occasional 357 Magnum use, that they were probably supposed to be used for 38 special use primarily. And of course, that would have been in the law enforcement portion of that. And we can kind of dig into that history where guys, law enforcement officers that were issued the 357 Magnums were still only shooting 38. And then that all changed because then they realized that your training doctrine had to, match. If they were carrying 357 Magnum, they certainly wanted to be training with 357 Magnum. So I think, again, the long story long now is that the K-frames got a lot more, or started to get more abuse than maybe Smith & Wesson had anticipated with the ammunition that became popular, but also because of the design changes that they had made to the K-frame. So fast forward, if you will, to the L-frame. And what's interesting, I had read a little while ago that the L-frame, it actually started off as the K-frame Super or Special? Super K. Super K was the term. I don't think that ever made it into marketing or public kind of terminology. I think it was more of an internal nomenclature or term as they were designing this pistol. But they obviously came to the conclusion that they needed a more robust design and frame, and effectively we got the L frame. It came out, I think, in 1980, first as the 586, which would be the blued version with the adjustable sight, and then the 686, and then, like I said, obviously we have here 681 with just the traditional sight, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we walk around. Some of the general specs, because I know you guys like the specs. Again, it's a 357 Magnum revolver, and it is clear and safe, so we can do that as well. We've got a clear and safe firearm. This one happens to be a 4-inch. I believe the majority of them were 4-inch. I'm not even sure they made them in other lengths. I can double check that. This one's a square butt. Obviously a 6-shot at this stage for 357 Magnum. Beautiful target walnut stocks on this particular example. Just, I think, set the whole pistol off. Obviously stainless steel. And its weight comes in at about 4 ounces, so that gives you a little bit of feel for the kind of the specs of it. This particular one is a 681. There were 5 engineering changes to this firearm, so it went all the way from a 681 to a 681 -5, and I'm not sure if we can get that there. It's always a little struggle to get these to to focus on camera, but this is a straight up 681, and it's an early manufacturer date, or fairly early manufacturer date, being 1981. So it's pretty early in the time frame, and of course the model number or stamp indicates that it's 681. And yeah, what else did I want to tell you guys about kind of the lineage of it? I think that's generally the lineage of the pistol per se. It was popular with state troopers, as was the 686, and certainly the highway patrolmen and so forth. But the stainless steel guns, as you can imagine, for law enforcement use out in the elements, became very, very popular over the blued guns. The L-frame guns became even more popular than the K-frame guns. It was interesting, you know, back kind of when the K-frame was conceptualized and designed, there was talk about let's make a smaller, lighter 357 Magnum from the N frame. But again, for everything we just talked about, they really felt they kind of needed to move back to a slightly more, sturdy design and platform in this medium to large frame revolver for 357 Magnum use, or regular 357 Magnum use. So that's kind of how we got here. But it was in that time frame, like I said, 1980 to 92. And so that would have been in the heart of law enforcement and state troopers. The state troopers, generally, from what I understand, highway patrol, state troopers, like the 686, some of the other stainless 357 Magnums were very, very popular. This obviously wasn't as popular in holsters as the 686 and some of the other 357 Magnums, probably because it came a little bit later to the game, but we can kind of start to do our deep dive on it, and you can see that this one does not have any kind of adjustable sight. This has a kind of a unique front sight to match up with the just traditional, U-shape, what I call troughed fixed rear sight that Smith & Wesson used on, just tons and tons of models. And interestingly enough, still use it today. If you look at the Model 10 in the Smith & Wesson catalog or on the website, it's in this design configuration. It's not, let me pull the 19 back. It's not in this configuration with an adjustable rear sight. Of course, the 686 and the 586 would have had the adjustable rear sight. And I have to admit, I think it is a better sighting system overall, so we can certainly see why that would have been popular with state troopers for sure. But you get back to the simplicity of this, and no possibility of it snagging or maybe the rear sight breaking or anything like that. Fast draw, aim, and shoot, and we can see how it would have become very popular with certain departments. And again, strictly from memory, New York, Ohio, those are the Oklahoma perhaps as well, and I think Chicago had a little bit of a run with these as well, but it may have been more of a kind of a testing thing, and I'm not sure how many officers actually wound up with the 681. But again, just a beautiful firearm. And what makes it unique is this kind of combination of L-frame, fixed sight in this just classic setup that Smith had. And we can kind of walk around that. And obviously the other thing, the other 800-pound gorilla in the room is the full lug, right? The full barrel lug on the L-frame. Obviously, again, from a weight standpoint, to reduce recoil for the 357 Magnum, so they added that. But again, just a beautiful firearm, and it's all stainless steel configuration, 6-shot, not recessed at this point. At this stage, Smith & Wesson has done away with that. You'll also notice it's not a pin barrel because we're now in the 80s. And from a hammer standpoint, though, we still have a hammer nose. We haven't moved to a flat hammer, and we don't have any really MIM parts or anything like that. This is this is a classic uber-engineered, uber-built Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum mid to large frame revolver, and to me, it's just absolutely gorgeous. I was very, very lucky to find this, very lucky to find it in a generally affordable range. Certainly a lot of 686s and 586s, and even some of the other now stainless steel 357 Magnums are, you're getting right at that 4 figures and now surpassing the 4 figures. This was well below that, thankfully, and so I found it to just be a beautiful piece. On this side, it's stamped Smith & Wesson, and we traditionally see that on the barrel. As we kind of just walk around, you've got, fluted cylinder, traditional traditional cylinder release, And the K-frame, or I should say the L-frame and the K-frames are still also kind of brother sister. I know we kind of use that term for the 686, and that's very true. But maybe cousins is a better word between the K-frame and the L-frame. Certainly for some of the internals and the trigger, I found this trigger to be absolutely beautiful. Again, within that K-frame, now L-frame, era of when Smith was just making an exquisite revolver with an amazing trigger. And it's funny, I just picked up I think it was a 686-8 maybe. And, just as much as I want to love the current generation Smiths, and not that I don't think they're made well, and not that I don't think it's a quality product, but the trigger feel on these older revolvers to me is just an attraction. And I hate to say it, but I'd almost say, if you're okay with a used firearm and know a little bit about used firearms and comfortable acquiring one, or you've got a reputable shop, or maybe know some of the owners at the shop that can kind of talk you through it, as much as I'd love to recommend a new one. And there's some positives to that, having a new firearm, of course. But these revolvers from the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s and some back to the 50s, just amazing. On this side, we have stamped 357 Magnum, which of course is just beautiful in the stainless steel. We've got the traditional 4-line information down there with the Smith & Wesson information that we're very familiar with, and then a very large trade stamp or Smith & Wesson logo, which I just again think is beautiful on this firearm. And the wood stocks are just again, for me, it just set it off. And it's a beautiful firearm to hold and shoot. I'll talk a little bit about that. No, just a smooth back strap here. So simple there, and of course full coverage on the front here from the wood stocks. But just an absolute beautiful firearm. It shot amazing, as you might imagine. I mean, just an L frame in 38 plus P, 357 Magnum. Again, the trigger was fantastic. It's just a beautiful firearm, and one that I wanted to bring to the channel because, again, I said I hadn't done a video in a while, and I thought a 681 was kind of it's kind of a neat little unique firearm to bring to you guys. And of course, I love the connection back to law enforcement, as there's so many times with Smith & Wesson just over and over and over and over again. But of course, then we know, this ended production in '92, and we all kind of understand the reason for that. And because the semi-automatic became the firearm of need and choice. Obviously, we've talked about it many times on this channel about the 1986 FBI Miami shootout, but that had just an enormous influence in law enforcement and ammunition design, ballistics, firearm choice. If you're just coming across my channel for the first time and haven't heard us talk about that, it's an amazing topic. I encourage, if you're into firearms and have some historical interest, or you're collecting guns, but maybe you're not overly familiar with that little piece of history. Unfortunately, 2 FBI agents did not survive that gunfight. All the others did, and they were able to kill the two bank robbers at that time. But the ripple effect from that gunfight, and what really rippled through the firearms and ballistics industries, took us away from revolvers, which of course is unfortunate because, again, just absolutely beautiful firearms, so much fun to shoot, enjoyable to shoot and own. But we all know kind of where that took us with the need for different calibers and semi-automatic pistols. Interestingly enough, I'm just reading again on the FBI 1986 Miami shootout, because I was fortunate enough to acquire the forensic analysis report. I don't know how many pages it is. It's actually a book. And so I've just started reading that, but it's kind of bringing all these very interesting topics back. And of course, the agents that day were armed with some were armed with 357 Magnums. If I remember correctly, one was a personally owned 686, but they were using 38 plus P, and many of the other agents had 38 snub nose, and several also had Smith & Wesson 459 9mm. But, again, kind of off topic there a little bit, but, this is kind of the end of this gun in 1992, because obviously after the 86 shootout, very, very quickly, literally within 4 to 5 or 6 years, almost, many departments had transitioned over to a semi-automatic. Not that these weren't grandfathered in, not that you still don't see revolvers and holsters. I do when I go to Chicago and New York still and things like that. But that's kind of why, again, if you're not familiar with the channel or revolvers, how these kind of came to an unfortunate kind of a macro demise, not really a micro demise, because revolvers obviously are still very popular. We know Smith & Wesson makes a variety of versions today, including a 686. So does Colt, so does Ruger, and there's, I don't want to say a resurgence in revolvers, but they never really go away. One, because of functionality, simplicity, and they're just fun to shoot. So, but I didn't want to go, too far onto too many different paths. But again, wanted to get to you guys, get another video out to you, and I think on this 681, it's a great one to get to. So, thank you again for supporting the channel, and we'll see you again very, very soon on the Daily Defender.